Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And good morning. This is Greg Hutchins, his pal.
Hey, Greg, glad you're online. I'm getting ready to put a webinar together. The time we're recording this next week, I've got a webinar on a topic of something that Carl and I kind of ran across is, well, how do we go about picking what to do for a particular problem or situation or experiment or whatever? And I thought, well, you've got a bunch of background in quality and quality methods, plus the risk and risk management stuff. And I'm sure you're going to tell me it's all risk-based, which is exactly right. But one of the things that is, I don't think, talked about very much, in at least in our literature, is, well, how do you know what tool or technique to use? So if you're helping a team develop a product, or you're helping a production line and make improvements for their uptime, how do you, and you've done the risk assessment, you've done the triage, you feel that this is the important, it needs to be done. But I'm thinking, if like a major question is it good enough? Is it reliable enough that we can ship it, or we can turn the line on, or that we can call success for our efforts? How do we know? And this is just an example of just a simple question. How do we know it's ready to go? It's reliable enough. And without getting in the details of how to do that, there's obviously lots of ways to do it. You could go from straight, just guess. It's like, I think it's good. Put your finger up in the air and go, the wind's blowing this way, must be good. Or a flat out, what do we call it in our industries? Engineering judgment. Based on our experience, we hope it's good enough, or that kind of thing. Or we could do some calculations, or we could run an experiment. We could do some more detailed modeling. We could do characterization. We could do a longitudinal study that takes forever. We could do a wide range of different tools and techniques to bring information to that question. But in the moment, I find that I just go, oh, this is what we should do. And so I've taken a step back from that. And well, how the hell do I do that? How do I know that that's the right tool and that I'm not missing something? So that's the question. And then I think a parallel to that is what I find with so many clients is that, well, this is the way we always have done it. This is the metrics we use. This is the techniques we use. This is the modeling we use. We always use our chamber to run these tests. And I was like, why? The question you're working on may or may not be informed with the results of that. I'm running 2 samples and I'm going to exercise them 20 times. And okay, so why? Why are you doing that? And I find so many people not able to answer that question, but I think they're related. One is you do it before you start into the lab, and the other one you do it, when I come in and say, why are you doing that? Which is obviously too late. But anyway, I figured I'd bounce that off you and see if you had any ideas. Why is it, I don't know. Is it a thinking problem, or is it I have no idea. But I'm not sure if that frames the problem or not. But what do you think?
What do I think? So I'm going to sort of approach this, not attack, but approach this question differently and probably pose more questions. So when I'm basically in a situation, the situation can be a problem. It could be a challenge, it could be a change issue. It can be, I'm confronted with something.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I look at is who's responsible for the problem and how are they approaching it? That's almost, to me, more important than what problem are we solving.
Well, the scenario that I just outlined is usually the program manager or the ops manager said, hey, Fred, go figure this out. I need to know. And go away. Don't bother me with the details.
Well, when somebody says solve the problem, there's a lot of aspects to it. And first of all, are you going to react or are you going to respond? If you react, it's going to be a knee jerk, what works in the past or has worked in the past, you're going to use in the present. Why? Basically, some form of confirmation bias. You've seen the problem before, you do a knee jerk, this is the solution.
Yeah.
People who, especially me, if I'm coming into a problem, I basically take a step back and I want to see how people respond to it. And what questions do they ask? Because to me, that's more important than just simply the answer. An answer to a problem that's incorrect is basically an incorrect solution.
Yeah, it's also a lot of wasted time and resources.
But that's what happens when we basically become reactive in our responses, right? This tool, FEMA's used in the past. I've seen this problem. FEMA worked. I'm going to use FEMA or HALT or whatever tool we're going to use.
Right.
But it's really the quality of the question that I think is important. Are people responding? Are they actually stepping back and looking at the entire context of the problem? Who's impacted? Who are the stakeholders? Is the problem basically a point problem? Is it a process problem? Is it a singularity? Is it an enterprise problem? Again, depending upon the lens that you're looking at the problem and the questions you're asking, you're going to get different forms of answer. And by the way, each answer, if you're looking at it from a cost lens or a risk lens or a schedule lens, it's correct. But the more you can step back and look at the entire picture and ask those questions, who's the stakeholder? Why is this problem important? What problem are we really trying to solve? And then take a deep breath and then talk to people. I think that's one way that we look at the problem. Because what I've seen is, especially in quality, we have our 7 tools. SPC, Pareto's, whatever.
Yeah.
And basically, people who look at the problem transactionally or from a product perspective will find the tool. And the tool quite often will provide a solution. But is that the right solution to the right problem? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So what I try to do is just simply take a step back and say, okay, what's the bigger picture? What's the landscape? Who's impacted? Why are we trying to solve it? And then I figure out what's the right lens to look at the problem. For many years, I've had one lens, which is the risk lens, but there is the cost, there's the reliability, there's the obvious quality lens. And maybe the solution isn't through the quality lens, it's through a project cost lens. So I try to contextualize the problem, understand it, and then come up with a proposed solution that I discuss with a lot of people.
I'm just thinking, I usually run into that kind of discussion when I go away and somebody says, oh, will this last? And I go away and I say, well, if we spend $500,000 and run all these characterization tests with 4,000 samples, we'll know. And with this kind of confidence, we use this exotic accelerated test algorithm and do those stuff. And they look at me going, no, you don't understand. I need an answer in 2 weeks with 2 samples. That's all you get.
Yeah.
Now it's time-based or it's cost-based I'm interpreting what you're saying is as the question comes up or the problem comes up that needs solving is scope it. What's the, what is, and it's something I've learned in consulting is the presenting question or problem is almost never the real problem. Is somebody will come to me and ask, how many samples do I need? Right. And says, well, that almost always is not the problem that they're trying to solve. It's much, they're trying to do what they normally do, and they know they need lots of samples and they want to figure out how to maximize that or minimize that or whatever. But they haven't looked at, well, when I ask, well, what are you trying to do? How well do you need to get this answer created, or what's your constraints and timeline and who's it for and why and all those kinds of questions, so I can understand what is it we're trying to do, what trade-offs related to sample size matter. Is this a $10 problem or a $1 million problem?
And that basically comes out to a magnitude. It's really the questions you're asking as opposed to the solution that's important.
Well, I could crank out my favorite sample size is 42, by the way, which is the ultimate answer. But a lot of people, the younger generation, hadn't seen those books, so they don't understand.
and mine, by the way, is 10 or 30. So
yeah, no, it's one of those things that I've run into people that say, well, how many samples do I need? And almost always when I ask, almost by a knee-jerk reflective response is, well, how many samples are you allowed to have? How many can you get? Well, I can only get 3. Well, then 3 is your sample size. Well, the test won't be useful. Well, then don't do the test.
Yeah, we've heard the expression, a hammer in search of a nail.
Yeah.
Sample size is the same type of question that we see in quality a lot. What type of sample size do we need? That's basically the hammer that is being used, or the filter or the lens for a lot of what we would call quality questions.
Yeah.
And again, that's a point type of question, like a point solution. It's not looking at the larger picture.
Well, and I've run into that where there was an interesting team making servers, and their company policy was that if something fails in the field and caused them pain, it was an escalated event, I think is what they called it, or something like that, where it became, we need to stop production and fix this and do that kind of thing. They figure that they're going to create a test that would identify if that issue is in the next product going out. And over time, about a decade, they ended up with I want to say 42. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a huge number of tests. And it was consuming a tremendous amount of resources to run all of these tests in a meaningful way. And so the group that was in charge of all this testing, I think it was the quality group, was like, we're getting buried, and and now we're on the hook because we're between, the development team and shipping, and they keep piling on more requirements for testing. And we never find anything. None of these things ever exist. Once we solve it, it's solved by design, and no designer wants to be called out at the last minute with the mistake leading to this known failure to occur. So it just doesn't happen. And sounds like your development team is paying attention to lessons learned, and go, yeah, but but they want us to prove that it's not there. And they're like, well, that's difficult to do in the best of circumstances. So you're, probably stretched pretty thin. And goes, yeah, you're saying it, but it's like, you didn't create an exit strategy. When do you stop doing something that's adding little to no value? And they didn't include a culture of, we don't use that material at all anymore. And this test is testing some feature or flaw that's unique to that material set or that design feature. There was no trigger to say, don't do that anymore. And the philosophy at the company level, the senior management was, well, we'll put a test on it. We'll make sure it never happens again. And then, all right, that's solved. Go away. Like, okay.
Well, that's a good example. So my little story is a Kappa story: corrective action, preventive action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, many years ago, we had a client, 10 years ago, we had a client who basically every time they did a Kappa did the same thing over and over and over again, which essentially is scrap and replace the product.
Yep.
Very costly. Sometimes if they had to scrap it and they had to go in the field because it was a field failure and basically pull products, yep, that could be many, well, in this case, hundreds of thousands of dollars, not $1 million, but hundreds of thousands.
Yep.
But every year, just like clockwork, there would be a Kappa, and they'd do the same type of thing. They never once thought about going upstream into manufacturing, engineering, design, and product management to figure out what's the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because, inspection, essentially first level supervisor, non-technical, but very smart, very committed, didn't have the moxie or the engineer, didn't have the whole view of the value stream, from.
Yeah, they're presented with a problem. There's products are failing, and so, well, we don't have a way to solve this, so we're going to just scrap it.
Yep.
And that just became routine, and yeah, that's what we do.
And that becomes the culture of the shop,
Yeah.
Fortunately. And, every year there's, I'm looking at the budget, there's probably 300,000 bucks for scrap. And they could have very easily, if they had the knowledge, the perspective, and the approval, it's a cultural issue, to go upstream to fix the problem, as opposed to replacing it, in the field.
Well, as opposed to a culture where anybody on the line can stop the production line or in the design, they can call it out and say, hey, this isn't right. And I actually saw that in a factory. It was in Texas. And I asked, these are not emergency stop buttons. What are these? He says, well, they're connected to that, but that's a shut down the line for a quality issue.
A Kanban cord. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was,
yeah.
And I said, does it get used? He goes, yeah, every now and then. But if you hit that button, you better have your act together, because the general manager is coming down to listen to it, to allocate resources to get it solved as quick as possible. And he says, yeah, once a month or so, we run into something that somebody spots, and 8 times out of 10, it's something that we need to fix, and it's prevented problems going to the field, prevented scrap downstream. And it's yeah, sometimes it's not really a problem, but it gets scrutinized and examined, and the questions and the concerns are taken seriously. And so it's become a virtuous circle. He says, instead of having operators just be blind and ship it, they have good eyes and ears and intelligence. Let them help us make a better product. And it became a completely different culture than what you see in a lot of factories.
Absolutely.
But it was the cultural part is such a big deal out of it. But if you don't have the saying, this isn't right, and then walk upstream and go talk to the director of engineering going, now look, you really can't make us, a good, viable product when you have blind connectors that I have to use a dental mirror to even see if it's, even close to being connected or not. I actually ran into a product like that. And, the first thing we did and it was the quality or the production team that was complaining about it. And they hired a consultant to walk across the hall to the development team and tell them about it.
That's a funny story.
Yeah. And I was like, why didn't you walk over there? And it was exactly what you just talked about, is they didn't have the, not moxie is probably the right word, but they weren't feeling safe in their culture to go do that.
And I think that's one reason why consultants are brought in, is to create a level of safety, or an independent third party who can ask the right questions, who can ask the point of view issues, right? Who can has the perspective of not only the problem, the point problem in front of us, but the process problem, maybe the programmatic problem, maybe the enterprise perspective. Because if you look at things from top down, from the enterprise perspective, it's going to be a lot different from bottom looking up.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate. I just ran one of the articles that I got in I need to read this article is, a lot of people spend a lot of money marketing and telling other people how great they are. Last design review I went to was more of a marketing ploy to encourage employees how great their product design was, instead of a review saying, we got to fix this stuff. Here's areas of concern. They didn't talk about any of that stuff. I was like, what's the point? It's more like a campaign rally than it was anything else. And it might have a purpose. I don't know exactly, but I was like, this is not what I was expecting. But the idea of being safe to say, hey, there's an issue here or a problem, is lacking in so many companies in so many areas. Um,
Yep.
but that speaks to that. That's the where the solution comes from. It's there might be a tactical error, or there might be one person that really believes this is the way to do it and it's the only solution, and they're not looking at the impact, say, on manufacturing. Is that one case I ran into, and then the eventual quality of their product. But structurally, I've railed against procurement teams, I don't know for how long, is there 10% year over year cost reduction. And I was like, okay, great. You can save a couple $100,000 by forcing your suppliers to provide components and materials cheaper. The ramification is that we end up with a higher field failure rate. And the cost per failure is this, and here's the number of failures. And so that's $300 million of failures. So I realized that you don't get scored on the increase in warranty, but your boss does. And I was talking to this one VP about it, and I was like, but your boss does. Do you want me to go talk to your boss, or do you want to bring up a brand new idea of how they could really save money? Do you want to be the hero?
Yeah, I'm wondering how that worked.
They didn't invite me back.
Yeah, and that's one reason. Again, it's fear factor. People don't want to raise difficult issues or confrontational issues. They want the status quo.
Yeah. But sometimes it costs you a lot of money, and somebody's got to say, hey, look, you're leaving money on the table here for no reason. Come on. It's nothing to do with reliability, but if you're paying for a gazillion tests that provide little to no information that anybody actually needs, why are you spending all this money for such little information content and valuable content? And on the other hand, you're creating this server that has got this brand new interconnect system or new design technology in it, and you don't have time to test that. So it's going to go to the field, it's going to fail. Now all of a sudden you have time to develop a test to evaluate it, and then you'll do that forever, but you've already designed it out. So it's like, sometimes I think it's that lens part is you come in and say, I can walk from door to door to door, whereas the people in the system rarely can. And I don't understand that, but this is getting away from how do you select the right method. But I think it's more important is that you look at the presenting problem in a clear way and understand the culture, the constraints, the purpose, why are we doing this? What's it for? How important is it? Then pick a sample size. Then say, hey, we need to do an accelerated test, or we need to do modeling, or we need to do a control chart, or, pick the method that has the right output to help you solve the problem versus just do the one that, I have a chamber, we'll throw it in the chamber.
I agree totally. It's basically responding to the situation, taking a step back, understanding what's really the context, and then asking the right questions. That would be my 2 cents worth.
Okay. Sounds simple. And if you're listening to this, it should sound simple. Hopefully we're coherent in presenting this issue or problem and possible ideas around solving it. But how do you look at when somebody brings you a problem or you identify an issue, can you walk across the hall to the manufacturing team or from manufacturing back to design, or can you talk to procurement and bring up topics that, what's the big picture here? How do we need to solve this or not? What kind of hurdles do you run into? Let us know. Head over to ascentoreliability.com/go/SOR. And Greg and I and the other hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn and through our about pages on the site. And we'd really like to hear from you. It often helps us to figure out what to talk about on here, and hopefully it provides you some meaningful information. So anyway, Greg, good talking to you. I'm trying to figure out, I've got firewood to unload today from my truck. So I think that presenting problem is just how do I lift efficiently so I don't hurt myself, but Ike should handle that. All right.
Yeah. Or get Diane out there. I'm just kidding.
All right. Thanks, Greg. We'll talk to you again.
Okay, Fred.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.